Punchier, fatter, thicker, more solid, all of those good things that we want from our drums. Hey guys, Dilby here, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got an awesome video for you. What we're going to be discussing is 5 ways to get your drums to sound better. Punchier, fatter, thicker, more solid, all of those good things that we want from our drums. First things first, drop a like on the video, make sure you're subscribed with the bell on. That way YouTube will let you know whenever I upload a new video. So the best thing about these tips is they're actually all super easy and you can implement them straight away. The thing is, if you don't know, you don't know. So let's go find out. So the first tip that I've got for you is to use less loops in your productions. It sounds simple, but let me explain. I've experienced this a lot with my mixing and engineering clients, where I receive a project and I go to mix it, and I realize that there's just layers and layers and layers of top loops that are all kind of competing against each other for space and making the track sound mushy. A much better approach is to create a solid foundation of basic drums using one-shots, and then selectively use loops to augment and elevate your track. This way you're not overcrowding things and everything has space in the mix. Okay, so I've prepared a little example to show you what I mean about top loops and how it can easily become too overcrowded and mushy. I've got some loops laid on top of each other. Let's have a listen. So initially that doesn't sound too bad, and this is something that I might get through as a mixing project where I listen to the rough mix that the client has sent me and I go like, oh yeah, that sounds okay. But during the mixing and mastering process, the level of everything is going to come up and these loops are really going to start fighting with each other for space. Let me show you what I mean by adding in a bit of my drum mix before and after processing. So you can hear those drums just start to sound mushy, they're competing with each other. From my perspective, that's unacceptable. So as a mixing engineer, I would have to go through and start to really try and control each of those individual loops, and I would have to make decisions about which is the most important element and give that preference in the mix. A much better approach is to start with a really solid basic foundation of drums and use some loops on top to augment and add to that. Let me show you how that works. So I've got a kick, a clap, and a couple of hi-hats here. So it's simple, but it's kind of fat and punchy and everything's got space in the mix. It's a great foundation to start from, but it is very basic. It doesn't have a lot of character that we might want in our drums. Let me add in this top loop. So I'm going to edit the envelope of this top loop to make it a little bit more punchy. And now that's sitting really nicely, the drums are grooving and it's got some kind of recognizable characteristics to it. But nothing's fighting for space and it all sounds super punchy. Tip number 2 is to use consistent swing in your tracks. So you can do this a number of ways by playing the drums yourself or slightly moving things off the grid. But the quickest and easiest way that I prefer is to use a swing template inside of Ableton. The important thing here is to use it purposefully. Make sure you apply it to all of your elements throughout the track. This will help to make things sound cohesive and consistent, and everything will be grooving well together. You can also leave some elements with no swing or with a different swing, which can help to create some contrast and shine a light on those particular elements. So I've added in this hi-hat and the MIDI is like this. It's just playing straight 16th notes. So to me that sounds really robotic and it's not really gelling with the rest of the drums. So let's have a listen to this clip where I've added in a groove template. This is MPC 16 Swing 57. So you can hear that that's moving these notes off the grid a bit and helping it to shuffle with the rest of the track. If I press the commit button, you can see that actually moves these MIDI notes off the grid and commits them to that clip. I prefer to do it just using the template, as it means that I've got the flexibility to change that later in the production process if I need to. So another way that we can add in a bit of groove to that is by adjusting the velocity of the MIDI. So as you can see, it's going up and down here. So that's doing something similar to the swing template. It's kind of helping it to groove along with the beat, and it creates like more of a flow and groove in this hi-hat pattern. Now of course we can add both the swing and the velocity. When we've got some groove in there with the swing and the velocity moving, it sounds a lot more natural, a lot more organic, a lot more like a real person would play on a drum kit. The next tip I've got for you is specifically for the high frequency elements, shakers and tambourines, that type of thing. And it's a way to thicken them up and make them sound fuller in your mix, so you don't need to use as many layers of them. I actually found this technique from Sébastien Léger in one of his studio broadcasts, and I actually found it so useful that I've integrated it into my template. So a great thing to add depth and excitement and interest to your drums is shakers and tambourines. I've got here this shaker loop. Sounds good, and I think it works well with the drums. But it's really sitting in that high frequency kind of area, up around 10K, and it doesn't have a lot of depth to it. So what you might be inclined to do is try and find another shaker loop to kind of sit lower in the frequency spectrum to kind of fill that out a bit. But we can actually avoid the need to do that using the Ableton erosion plugin. So what this is doing is adding some white noise in a specific frequency band, in this case around 4K. So let's take a listen before and then add in the erosion. So that really just helps to thicken out this shaker loop. We'll take a listen to it in solo so you can hear the effect in more detail. So that just adds a lot more depth and weight to the shakers and fills them out in the frequency spectrum, and I no longer feel like I need to add another layer to them. So tip number 4 is to use parallel processing. This is a common technique used by the most pro mixing engineers to really get things sounding thick and crunchy and fatten them up, but still keeping everything punchy and bright in the mix. Parallel processing is a really key technique, and it's something that can be used creatively in a bunch of other applications. Okay, so parallel processing is something that I use a lot in my workflow. I've got a bunch of return channels here built into my template. If you want to see a detailed overview of my template, I'll link that video so you can check it out. But let's just have a look at this channel here, which I use to add some width and brightness to high frequency elements in my drums. Let's take a quick listen and I'll show you what it's doing. So you can hear there that as I turn up the send, it starts to get wider and brighter. So what I'm doing here is cutting out any of the low frequencies. I'm adding in a house effect with this filter delay. I'm pumping up the high frequency a bit with this EQ and adding some crispy saturation with the decapitator. So the benefit of doing this in parallel is that we've got the original signal playing at full volume. So this is just like pumping up the side frequencies and giving it a bit more space in the mix, but we can still hear that solid shaker loop down the middle. Another example of parallel processing, on my clap I've got this reverb. So a common technique to create tension is to automate some reverb to create a washy effect on some drums, right? So let's listen to this clap. We've got a very subtle reverb here. I'm just using it to add some space and character to this clap. But if I pump up the dry wet, you'll hear the effect that I'm talking about. So you'll recognize that from tracks and build-ups and things. But what's happened here is we've lost all of that punch of the clap. So the way I like to do this is using a return here. I've got another reverb. So I get that same washy effect, but I still have the punch of the clap coming through. So I have another parallel processing chain for my kick. So you can hear that's adding a bit of weight and body to the low end and kind of thickening out the sub frequencies. Let's have a look at what's happening here. I'm adding some heavy compression that's thickening out that kick. I'm using this EQ to roll off some of the tops, which avoids the transients getting overblown and means that just the low end of the kick is getting pushed up a bit to kind of create that thick weight and body. So my fifth and final technique is to bus all of your drums together. So that is going to allow you to process all of your drums as one single element or drum kit. This is something that's a key part of my workflow and is integrated into my template. It helps to give me my signature sound. So I'm a big advocate of bussing my drums together. I feel like it really helps to gel things, make them sound like cohesive, like they're acting as one unit. The drums, not just this hi-hat, that clap. In modern electronic music, we're often using different drums from different sources, and they're often processed in different ways and have their own unique characteristics. We want all of those drums to work together and sound like they're supposed to be together. So I'm going to quickly walk you through my processing chain on my drum bus, which helps to gel all those elements together and get them sounding as one unit. I've covered this in depth in other videos, so I'll link that here if you want a bit more detail. So first up, I've got some saturation. Next up, I've got a compressor, which is doing about 3 dB of gain reduction and about 1.5 dB of makeup gain, just helping to balance everything out. Next up, I've got an Ableton glue compressor, which is really slamming the drums with about -10 dB of gain reduction and then adding about 10 dB of makeup. I'm using this in parallel mode with the dry wet. So this is just really helping to bring up those quieter elements and really thicken the drums up. So again, it's a subtle effect. Next up, I've got a decapitator, which is adding in a very small amount of saturation. Which helps to add a bit of life and kind of brightness and sparkle to the drums. This is also helping to kind of add that mix gel, if you like. Next up, I've got a stereo imager that's adding some width in the mids and upper mids and keeping the subs in the very high-end mono. This helps to keep things punchy, stop them phasing, and keep those transients intact. So you can hear that adds some really nice space and width to the drums. So all these things sound really subtle by themselves, but I'll turn this off and on and you can hear. So that really brings the drums to life and helps them work well together. Alright guys, so I hope you enjoyed that, and you can see that there's some key techniques there. They're all pretty simple, but they can really help elevate your drums to the next level. Make sure you hit the like button on the video and drop a comment. Let the rest of the community know if you've got some other tips and techniques about how to thicken up your drums, get them fat and get them punching. Make sure you follow me on Instagram, it's @DilbyDJ. I love hearing from you guys in my DMs, I'm really active there, so let's chat. Anyway, that's it for today. We'll catch you next time. Peace!